goals of the elements, because the elements are susceptible to change. So you have the 4 elements, and then you have the 5th element. Not Lilu. Okay. Internet spirits, please. Let's stay on topic. Hey, what's up, wizards? Time for us to actually dive into Bonatti. And again, we're using the Ben Dykes translations. Ben Dykes is awesome, and he is our unknowing supporter in this. So I recommend, again, that you go purchase a copy so you can study along. These videos are being made to really kind of serve as a bridge between you being you and then you understanding this 13th century work, because we're all quite modern in our thinking, and there's a lot of stuff in here that's not quite sense making. So totally recommend that you pick it up so that you can follow along, and let us consider beginning, but not yet begin, because that would be way too easy. So what I kind of wanted to do is cover how this is organized. And right now we're on Treatise 1. Treatise 1 is Bonatti's Defense of Astronomy, where he lays out a super simplified concept of how astrology works. And then he starts defending it against common arguments of his day. The downside is some of those arguments aren't exactly anything that we would consider these days, like the ninth heaven. He spends quite a bit of time in chapter 4 discussing the ninth heaven. We'll get there. So in those cases, I've kind of, I'm going to be doing a bit of commentary and try to kind of discuss how that might bridge to other arguments and some of the points he's making. Also, I don't always agree with Bonatti. So you guys are going to get my opinion too. I know you're here for Bonatti because Bonatti is the man and he's a great astrologer. I'm just a journeyman dude, but since you're listening to me, I get to have my say a bit as well. So that's just the overview. Now, before we begin, I do kind of want to go into one other thing, because there's some technical language that everyone assumes they understand, and I don't think they really quite grok it. So I want to kind of get us on the same page as far as at least one thing. So what I'd like to do before we really dive into Bonatti is I kind of want to discuss what the soul is. Most of my explanation, all of my explanation is being lifted from Pierre Grimes. He's a Platonist philosopher. He's really great. There's going to be a link to one of his videos at the end of this video. But let's go ahead and discuss a soul. And I'm going to have the daimons of the internet draw on a whiteboard for me, because the internet likes whiteboard stuff, right? So hopefully you guys enjoy the way that this is working. Let me know in the comments. Later on, we might even have daimons. So, what is a soul? Well, you are here, right? You clicked on this video, or it auto-played and you didn't stop it, which is a little bit different, but we're going to assume that you clicked. So, you clicked on this video. Why did you click on this video? You had some goal in mind when you clicked on this video. It might be that you were bored and you just didn't want to sit there and think, or your nose had already been fully picked. Those are totally possible. You might just be trying to kill some time while you're waiting on something. You want to see a dude in a funny hat talk. That's also a thing. But whatever reason you clicked, there's something about that you felt that you would get some kind of benefit from. So you had this thing happening, and so you had this goal of changing your state. So you have your goal of changing your state, and this video is a bridge to doing that. How? Well, you're experiencing a thing you don't want to experience, or you want to experience something, and this video is what you want to experience. And you know the benefit that you'll get from it. So then you plan, and that, in our case, clicking takes like no effort. It's a low effort thing. You really need to start watching your thoughts. And then you commanded yourself to click. Click, 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 click. And that is how you ended up here. Well, that's how you end up anywhere. That's how all your actions happen. There's always something that you need to do for some reason. You have a goal. And your goal is to seek out some form of benefit. Now, there are different kinds of benefits. There's conflicting parts of the soul. That's not our discussion, and Pierre Grimes will go into much better detail than I will on that. I'm just a magician, wizard person. Pierre is a full-fledged philosopher. So watch his video if you want to understand it. But that part of you that leads you to take action is your soul. That's it. We're not talking about Jedi Force ghosts. We're not talking about your inner Casper. We are just talking about those things that motivate your body to action and that place where you live in your mind. And those things of your mind, well, it's not even mind, it's a step above mind. Those things that motivate your mind to help you move in certain directions. So with that covered, and notice the soul has wings. That's described in Plato, and Pierre put the squiggles on, and I like that. So anyway, so without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into Bonatti. The way that he organized his defense, it's chapters. They're kind of miniature essays. It's how these books are typically written. They are related, mostly. And in the beginning, they're strongly related. It's later on you get to these places where it's kind of like, here's this argument, then here's this argument, then here's this argument. So the very first thing is, well, if you're going to practice astrology, why would you even practice it? Why pursue this art? What is it about astrology that is beneficial? What is useful? And this is why you need to understand soul. So Bonatti starts with something that it echoes of Ibn Ezra. And Ibn Ezra said that wisdom is the food of the soul. So I think that we should take a minute and really consider what the food of the soul would. Okay, not soul food. Soul food is 1960s American, African American, like that's when that started. And it's very much part of the African American culture. And we're going back to earlier things. So spirits of the internet, away with the fried chicken and mac and cheese, although that looks delicious. Anyway, so what does food do for the body? Well, when food is used properly for the body, it builds up the body and allows the body to perform the actions that you need to take in the world. It nourishes you so that you can go forth and do things. Now, if you eat too much, it impairs that, but we're dealing with 13th century worldviews here. We have a much less scarcity in our world, and we have fast food and, yes, fried chicken. But all of that is not really where we're going. We're, again, when properly employed, food allows your body to function better. The body gains more capability from proper nutrition. So the soul would gain more ability through knowledge and through wisdom. And how does the soul's ability work? Well, it means that you can make better goals, that your actions become more in line with the divine. And Bonatti approaches this a bit differently. What he says is that the super celestials are perfect, and they're spheres, so they have no beginning and no end, no middle. And you can't look at them like, oh, I can cut a sphere in half, and then it has a middle. in the center. That's not actually how that works from the philosophical Bonatti perspective. It's about going around the sphere. So if you hit any point on the sphere and go in a direction on the surface of the sphere, you're going to make a full circle, and there will be no beginning and no end. And you can go in any direction, and that'll be the case. Any one of them. And that is a important concept to really play with. Geometry is interesting, and it will help. And again, these are very heady topics. So just hold on. We'll get to my sun sign is Aquarius. We'll get there. That in a year. We'll get there. Actually, Treatise 2 is going to talk about signs. But as far as constructing charts, much later. So as far as the other perfection, they're unchanging. The super celestials, so the planets and stars, because the planets are stars as far as ancient astronomy is concerned. So the planets are unchanging. And from the perspective of, everyone that was around before, 200 years ago, the planets were completely unchanging. You just saw these balls in the sky. And so they were more abstract. So let's go ahead and pretend that they are unchanging to understand Bonatti. I'll get into some of my own theories of astrology later, which are a bit more compatible with modern science. But consider these spheres as unchanging. And because they're unchanging, they can't actually be influenced. Everything they do is done by their own choice and their own design. So what moves them is something deeper than on the surface level. Their movements being able to be predicted shows an inherent pattern to their choices and the way that the world works, which indicates the divine. They're the most noble and perfect because the most noble is actually that which commands. The most noble is the most rarefied. It's the purest. And in that way, it's the best representation of a thing, and it's what is able to lead the other things. So if you're able to wrap your head around what it means that the planets are unchanging, and that the planets are perfect, and that the planets influence the world, you can start to understand what something eternal and unchanging is. And that brings you one step closer to understanding God. So let me go ahead and read a quote from Bonatti, and I have a useful meme that will go with it. And that is, and there is nothing besides first philosophy in which the soul gains so much wealth as in astronomy or astrology. For through it we know and understand impassible and unalterable creatures, and those not changing into another essence, as are the supercelestial bodies. And through those creatures we can reach an understanding of the Creator, and know him however much more the human mind can attain to, and we can perceive him to be impassible and unalterable. So we have the beginning argument that he's making is we study astrology in order to better understand God. And that's not going to be something that the astro columns are going to encourage. And I think it's something really important to contemplate. And yes, I know I'm clergy, so but why would I study astrology as a member of clergy? That would be the question I would pose to you. And why am I teaching this? So next thing Bonatti goes into is after he makes it clear that it brings you to a better knowledge of God, he starts arguing about the astrologer being better than medical doctor. And he says that the medical doctor is probably the most noble of terrestrial things, but it's still less than an astrologer, because with the medical doctor, they're always studying corruption. They want to understand how bodies change and how to change them back. And Bonatti feels like this is less than the astrologer, because since you're studying the unchanging bodies in astrology, you're starting to be able to see how those unchanging bodies actually influence and cause the changes in the changeable bodies. I know this is complicated. Just stick with me. I promise it'll get easier. And he goes into the inferior bodies. And the inferior bodies are those that are on Earth and are composed of elements. And a lot of people think, oh, well, that means there's equal measure of all the elements. And then, or you have some people that are straight fire, some that are water, some that are, Avatar stuff. No, The Last Airbender. Right. Yes, Avatar, The Last Airbender. Yeah. Okay. So, that all is great. And there are certain personalities that are a bit more tilted towards each element, and in medical astrology you use that. But it's really important to note that the elements are present in all things, and they're in different mixtures. Like, you can't have a person made entirely of fire. They would not be able to function, because there'd be no water, no earth. They wouldn't be able to manifest anything but action. And so they would spread like a fire. They wouldn't be something fully ensouled or sensible or made in divine image, because pure fire is completely unbalanced. So that's kind of one of those things that plays into this as well. And the idea is that the divine uses the planets, which are unchangeable, to change and influence the cycles of the elements, because the elements are susceptible to change. So you have the 4 elements, and then you have the 5th element. Not Lilu. Okay. Internet spirits, please. Let's stay on topic. So we have the quintessence, or 5th element, and that is an eternal and unchanging elements. No, it's not like the Captain Planet heart either. It's an unchanging thing that kind of encourages the movement or causes the movement. And that's why it's super confusing, and that's why alchemists pull their hair out, trying to understand these very, very heady concepts. But for now, you just need to know there's this 5th element. It's unchangeable. The planets are made up of it, and through their movements, they themselves cannot be changed by those things they come in contact with, but they can change them. And I mean, that should kind of make sense, right? So, okay, smart-ass science people, I don't even want to hear your response to this. But say you get a golden ball and you drop it in a glass of water. It's going to displace the water. It's going to cause a splash. And the water is not going to have any discernible effect on the golden ball. That's part of why gold is held in such high esteem, because it is what it is. So knowing that, we can kind of move forward. And Bonatti also argues here that the terrestrial motion is joined. The celestial motion of the world is widely understood, but he says that needs to be thought of metaphorically, because the planets influence the world, but the world doesn't influence the planets. He sees that as a one-way connection, not a true connection. And that covers the first part, and that's again chapter 1. It's just super simple, going into this brings us closer to understanding God, and then contrasting the doctor and the astrologer and discussing inferior bodies, and also seeing that if you study the way that things change, then without studying the principles behind that changing, without studying those bodies that are causing the change, then your vision of them is incomplete, even though you're able to do quite a bit. So that brings us to chapter 2. So if we accept that these things cause changes, how exactly does this work? How do the stars imprint on the inferior bodies, the changes that by their motion? How can we see this? Because this sounds like a load of crap. How can one really dig in and see this operating to know if astrology is even worth reading? We're in the second chapter of the book. There's still time that we can throw it away and say, I read some Bonatti, and astrology just sounds like crap to me. So at this point, Bonatti gets into specific examples, and he starts discussing the way the motions of the heavens are most responsible for like the changes. And he really relies on the sun and moon because they're the most apparent. The sun with its heat and the moon with its light. And he brings up the seasons. So he says that the sun changes Earth because spring, summer, autumn, and winter are clearly caused by the sun and where the sun is in the sky. And then you'll notice that based on where the sun is, the earth is heated, chilled, dried, and moistened. This based on where the sun is in the sky. And with that, we can see, oh yeah, well, there are times that things get hot and uncomfortable, especially down here in Texas. There are times when the world gets cold. There are times whenever the world is drier, and there are times that it's wetter, and sometimes places flood, and sometimes we have droughts. And they do typically occur in certain seasons. So we're able to see the impact of the sun on the earth. And he brings up spring and points out that you can see vegetable as well as animal and soul creatures grow and reproduce in spring. More things have babies, plants blossom, and you can see that mostly happens in spring, which tells you something of the nature of that sun being in that part of the sky. He also talks about the moon's light affecting the earth very much, which you can see in the tides, and you can also see what's going on with the moon's light in the way that the farmers' almanacs will tell you, which will be covered in the astrology later. But the old farmers and ranchers that I know swear by their almanacs. It's the Bible and the Farmer's Almanac. Those are the two books that they will absolutely take with them everywhere. They cannot live without those two books. And the Farmer's Almanac will tell you to do things like when are you going to plant things. Well, it's going to be based on where the moon is in the sky. When are you going to shear your sheep? Well, that's going to be when the moon is in the right place in the sky to do that. And if you act outside of those things, there's more of a chance of injury. There's a lot more bleeding that occurs. So that's kind of where those things come from. And that's all assumed knowledge. Bonatti understands, like, assumes that you get this. Well, we now live in comfortable climate controlled places where it's really, really easy to ignore everything that happens outside. And that way we miss what's going on. I mean, do you know what plants blossom when? I don't know as many as I'd like. That's very much a thing that will let you see what's happening in the world and how the stellar influences affect the world. This isn't all imaginary. This is explaining physical consequences. And he says if you can accept the sun and the moon, then you're likely to accept the other bodies as well, but they're a bit more subtle. But he really kind of hangs his hat on the sun and the moon because it's obvious that they affect the world. And he's like, if those two affect the world, then why not other things? And that kind of brings in with the how we actually arrive at what this all means. And how does astrology fit in with the other mathematics and sciences of the day? And he says that by understanding the impact that the supercelestials have on Earth, by understanding the way the planets move and the way that impacts the Earth, then we'll be able to get a firm grasp on all things past, present, and future. Because if we understand that our lives ourselves, the lives of nations, and the general state of the world, it all is influenced by the movement of planets, then by doing this continuous research and really understanding this, we can come to know the past, present, and future all at once. And at that point, all things will open up to us. And he argues that this is a mathematical science, and the reason he argues that is because the existing sciences of the day that were recognized generally is arithmetic, which dealt with number and understanding the properties of number. Then you have geometry, which is all about measure. So you want to be able to measure things and understand exactly how those proportions work. With music, you want to be able to understand harmony. And understanding harmony will allow you to understand how things interact with one another. And will understand how the proportions demonstrate the actions. With astronomy, it's understanding the movement of the planets and being able to predict the movements of the planets. So knowing that the planets affect everything on Earth. And if you understand the way that they predict everything on Earth, at that point, understanding that movement is understanding the full interaction that underlies all of that. So that's why he would argue that it was the most noble. Now, my personal position is that I don't believe that things work in cycles. I believe they work in spirals because I believe everything that's happened to a thing impacts the next cycle or the next iteration. Each year is a new year, but the years that have added up mean something different has happened. You, whenever you're 1 year old, are a different animal. Yeah, you are when you're 21 years old. So even though those things are moving in the sky, it's still a bit different. So I dissent in that case, but I do believe that influences do cycle that way, and that influences and themes will come up. But if I try to look 1,000 years in the future, and I do all of the astrological work to do that, I'll be able to tell you the themes that are happening, and I'll be able to give you an abstract of what that will look like. But I will not be able to tell you specifically what technologies are involved or exactly what these things mean in that world. Because again, you have to be able to recognize that different things manifest in different ways based on the full context. Like, what are you going to do for? Here, I'll use some Warnock examples. What planet corresponds with light bulbs? Which planet corresponds with roller skates? You have some choices there. I mean, luminaries for light bulbs, and then you could go with the moon or Mercury for roller skates. I'd probably lean a little bit more towards Mercury, but if you were trying to figure out, you look and you see there's going to be a roller skating championship this year, how would Bonatti have interpreted that? I don't think he would have thought in terms of roller skates. That's just not a thing he would have thought. How would the light bulb being invented appear to someone like Bonatti? I don't think he would have been able to tell you it would be the creation of a thing that could create light. I think that he would have probably told you that it would be something that would bring about great authority or would distribute authority, or something more along those lines. Again, I can't really know that for certain, but that would be where I would go with it. So we start getting into some of Bonatti's, one of Bonatti's first arguments. And this is the one involving the ninth heaven that I mentioned at the beginning. And this is his argument against those who say that knowledge of the stars cannot be known by anyone. And most of that argument is centered around the ninth heaven. And the argument that the ninth heaven itself is a star. And Bonatti starts being able to pull that apart and say, well, if it's a star, then it's equally as influential because it's beyond everything that we can see, and we have there is no way to tell, or there's no way to see how it's able to gather and distribute its energies. So whatever. We don't really speak in terms of heavens anymore. We don't speak in terms of the spheres. So the ninth heaven as the ninth sphere being beyond the realm of fit stars and being its own star with its own influences that offer no predictions. We have more of, well, there's a whole galaxy out there. And that really brings us to an argument that Bonatti does address, and that is where he addresses there are people that say that if the stars are influences, if the stars do have this much of an impact, that you only know of 1022 of them because of the writings of Ptolemy. So you're completely ignoring all these other stars that have these massive influences that you can't know, so you can't reliably predict anything. And that's kind of a devil's advocate. Well, yeah, I don't think astrology is a thing, and even if it were a thing, just entertaining the idea. Let's say that each single star has an influence. How are you able to function in that world? Because when you do a horoscope, are you looking at 1022 stars plus the ones that aren't cataloged by Ptolemy? And that also plays into the Ophiuchus argument. The people who think that, oh, Ophiuchus is a constellation. No, that it's not about. I would argue that it's not quite about the constellations, but it kind of is. So that plays into Al-Kindi and his on-stellar influences, and that's going to be another side quest we have. At the end of this video, I'll link to Esoterica on Al-Kindi, so you'll be able to figure out which way you want to go. And also, as we're getting close to the end of the video, if you have found value in this video, please like and subscribe. so that you can continue to see awesome videos of me explaining Bonatti and hopefully digging into some other things as well in the near future. Just want to get really strongly started with these Bonatti videos first. So, what is the answer to that? The answer is it's built into the signs. These signs are themselves representative of all the stars that are part of that sign or part of the sky at that time. I would say that at this point we get into the sidereal versus tropical zodiac argument, and it looks like Bonatti is really kind of focusing on an argument that I think would make more sense from a sidereal perspective. My own argument at this point is a bit different. I argue that the slivers of time are more important than the stars, and that the space and light is more important than the stars. The stars are themselves markers. The Ophiuchus argument I see as really, really dumb, and here's why. If you look at a clock and the clock has somebody randomly writes 13 between the 12 and the 1, do you say, look, that's proof that there are 13 hours in the day? Is that at all rational or reasonable? That is the assumption that I see being made there. My belief in astrology is that the stars are more signs, not the influencers. So I disagree with Al-Kindi's theory of stellar rays, but I think it's important to understand it. I think it's important to work with, and the focus on that is going to be magic and astrological talismans. And we'll get into my views on those later. But the argument that Bonatti makes, again, is that it's wrapped up in the signs anyway. So all the signs are composed of the stars, and the reason for the qualities of the signs is because of all those stars which make up the signs, not just the stars that are in the signs themselves. So like Ophiuchus would be spread out over the things it's in, and not its own independent. And that concludes the first 4 chapters of Treatise 1. So let's go ahead and hop to the side quests, which are exciting and fun. So, side quests. You can go 2 places, because it's going to be at least a week before another one of these videos is out, or you can stick with the playlist if you're watching this after more of these are out. But I would recommend that you study up on Plato with Pierre Grimes, and that will appear over my head or beside me, one of these 2 places. Or you go down the magical rabbit hole by checking Al-Kindi's on the stellar rays, and that will be on the other one. And both of those I cannot recommend highly enough, and I will check in with you guys and gals, wizards, sorcerers, and whoever else happens to watch this next week.